Hi guys, the episode that you're just about to listen to is generously sponsored by our affiliates Board Game Crate. Board Game Crate provide a monthly subscription service where they get fresh new games delivered straight to your door. Just head over to www.boardgamecrate.co.uk, and furthermore, if you use our discount code UnluckyFrogIsAwesome, all lowercase, all one word, you'll get a cheeky little discount. It's easy to remember because it's true.
Hello and welcome to the Unlucky Frog Gaming Podcast. I'm your host Ben Porter, joined by my co-host for this evening, Mr. Tom Mannering.
Hello.
How are you doing, Tom?
I'm good. You?
Yeah, well, I'm getting there. It's been one of those days, shall we say? But we have a guest this evening. We are joined by Elaine Lithgow, producer at DigiSprite and freelance writer for Cubicle 7.
Hello.
How are we doing, Elaine?
Good. It's been a long day, but we're here.
Yeah.
Looking forward to having some good chats.
Yep, and it is Friday as of recording, so...
It is.
Yeah.
So thank you for having me on a Friday night.
I know. We're such party animals, aren't we?
We have very busy social lives, but we've managed to fit you in.
Yeah. Yeah. We were totally going out, you know, partying like a couple of crazy kids that we are, but we
saying you're living that weird podcast life.
Yeah, that's it. So let's talk a little bit about the news, because being the sad basement dwellers that we are, Tom and myself were not aware that there was any news. But Elaine, just before we started recording, you were telling us that that there's been I guess an unfortunate development at Kickstarter HQ.
Yes, it seems that they've let go 3 of their staff who were seemingly pivotal in some form of attempt to form a union at Kickstarter.
Okay.
Now, the official report, of course, is that Kickstarter, they did not let these people go due to their union affiliations, but as of recording, they haven't actually given a statement as to why these people were letting go, which, given HR, they're probably not going to say why, but obviously it's got people talking about, you know, workers' rights, etc. in that company.
Yeah. And it's of course there, without getting too much into the political side of it, there's definitely a sort of cultural aversion to unionizing within the US, isn't there? So it's not as if it's as much as we love to dish the dirt on Kickstarter on this podcast, it's not as if it is a problem necessarily specific to them.
No, absolutely not. And you only need to throw a stone anywhere online to find there being calls for unionization across like the wider games industry, in video games and everything as well. There's definitely people wanting it and lots of other people opposed to it. So
It always seems to be a bit of a dirty word, doesn't it? Union, whenever it's brought up in an employment sense, employers don't want to hear it.
Because I think it's like you say union and immediately there's definitely a little group of people that whenever you mention union, they think of like Karl Marx and like the Russian Revolution and all that. You know, it's they lump all of that in together. It's all the same as far as they're concerned, and it's all there to actively destroy their way of life.
I sort of imagine that employers see the union as kind of the Spanish Inquisition from the Monty Python sketch, you know, just kind of bursting in.
For me, I think it's always this weird... the thing with unions is that the average sort of member of the public, you only really hear about unions when there's strikes. Like unions
Yeah.
are only ever mentioned in conjunction with negative things. You know, people aren't singing the praises of the day-to-day support and things like that that unions do. When things are going well, their names are always synonymous with problems and strikes, and the unions are demanding this and the unions are demanding that or whatever. So I think it's quite easy to demonize the concept when the reality is probably a lot more benign on a day-to-day basis.
I think so. I mean, and the fact that these discussions are taking place is again indicative, I think, of Kickstarter's growth, isn't it? That it's a company that's of a size now that people are talking about the need for something like that.
True.
And I dare say this is probably not the last that we're going to hear of it, given how quickly word spreads about the stuff that goes on at Kickstarter.
I think it's definitely bad press for Kickstarter, though, regardless of whether or not there's truth to it, which I suspect there is some truth to it. But to have that go up, the 3 people that were highly involved in founding a union have been laid off together. That's pretty suspect.
I hope that at least some good comes out of it for them, because again, this is the thing, right, where if you want to get rid of an employee in the UK, for instance, there has to be due process, right? You can't just go, right, pack your desk, you're gone. I mean, you could do that, but you would get called up before a tribunal, inevitably. But you can do that in America, and it's because, unfortunately, it is a country where workers' rights are pretty much non-existent.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that Kickstarter are probably going to find themselves under quite a bit of pressure to do something about this, given that they are an international company. I mean, although like we're talking about their headquarters, their head office, and really there they only have to adhere to New York law, which is where it's based. Their public image is massively important to them, especially with them being a company that is wholly dependent on the internet. I think they're going to be taking quite a bit of flack for this.
Their public image as well, even though they are now a very large company, their public image is very indie oriented. Like their front pages and the way they do their videos and everything, they try to come across as a very approachable and kind of down to earth company and things like that. So when sort of bad press like this starts to sting them, what's it going to take for them when their public image and their practices clash? What's the result of that going to be?
That's quite a common thing, that I think, with a lot of American tech companies now, though, isn't it? Presenting themselves as this sort of benign, quirky, hippie type company. Like you see like the pictures of the Google offices, and the employees are going down the slides and like they're eating quinoa in the cafeteria and all that. But then they're doing like some of the most egregious stuff behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think it's just a way they go in it, unfortunately, in this day and age.
Yeah, there's something especially predatory about doing that, though. Like Elaine's saying, Kickstarter, like, oh, we're the quirky, new start company, and we're going to help your company, and then they're just firing people because they don't like them trying to
Unionize.
bring about any reform.
Not the most positive news to start with, is it?
It's a bit on the downside.
No, it's not. So that hate to be a bit of a downer, but yeah, that's the news. Woo.
Debbie Downer here.
Yeah. On a slightly lighter note, that there is something I was saying to you, Tom, and it is Kickstarter related actually, but this isn't Kickstarter's fault. I forgot to mention it in the podcast last week, and it was I got an email from Steamforged Games informing me that I will shortly be receiving my stretch goals for for the Dark Souls game.
Are you excited about that?
Really not. So for anyone that doesn't know, the Dark the Dark Souls game shipped 2 years ago, and they're only just now rolling out the add-ons and stretch goals for it. It's pretty much a weird sort of horses bolted type scenario. I was saying to Tom, I've actually sold my copy of the game.
Oh no.
So I'd actually forgotten that I was eligible for this stuff, and I mean I'll probably just I'm not going to kick up a stink or anything about it, but it's far from what Steamforged needed given recent events, but I guess it's better late than never, isn't it?
Did they give a justification as for the 2-year delay? Was it?
I haven't seen an outright justification for it, but I know that they have a lot of very unhappy backers on their hands for various reasons. I mean, Tom, you backed the is it the Critical Role?
Yeah, I backed the Critical Role minis. They were a little bit late, but the main complaint was the quality in the early releases. But then they did address a chunk of that.
Yeah, and we were saying earlier as well, it's so strange given how strong they started with Guild Ball, isn't it?
I'll tell you, I'd say that I do have a gripe with them that you've just reminded me of. So I get a monthly model from them. They do a Critical Role mini a month in resin. And I always buy it 'cause it's always a limited release for the month. And they've started... Now, bearing in mind this is a UK-based company, they've started increasing the pricing on the postage and packaging on it. Now, I think when I first got them from them, the postage and packaging was around £3, maybe £3.50. I think the most recent one, the postage and packaging, was about £6. It's the same size models, nothing's changed, but there's almost like something like 75% markup in the postage and packaging. And there's been a lot of people kind of commenting on their Facebook, why is there this massive increase in postage and packaging, especially in the UK, where you're posting it internally. Like, what's the difference? I can post some at recorded delivery for less than £6. Fair enough, they've got the boxing and the padding, but it shouldn't really come to that much more to have that much of a hike up in the postage and packaging costs. So that is my recent bugbear with them. I'm sure they're farming it in on postage and packaging.
Just rolling in that postage and packaging cash.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm certainly not aware of any recent price hikes with Royal Mail, but maybe it's a sort of preemptive measure for Brexit chaos.
But that wouldn't affect internal post, would it really? And I mean, the thing, what I think it is I'm wondering if they don't want to increase the price on the models. So they're increasing the price through the postage and package, so they can still say, "Oh, we're selling the model for, £12, £13, whatever it is." But then they're upping it. So I mean, you're paying, including postage and packaging, just shy of about £20 for one model now.
What do you reckon, Elaine, as our industry insider?
Maybe if you were to speak to Director Robin, she'd be able to give you more information. I feel like when we were distributing our first Kickstarter, Doomsday Bots, I'm pretty sure that you get, in essence, like a Royal Mail account, and you put all of your parcels and everything through there, and then it gets priced up, and then you essentially get an invoice from Royal Mail rather than having to pay per parcel type thing. So there is every chance that with the looming shadow of Brexit on us, that maybe international shipping is hiked to such a point that the majority of their shipping has increased across the board, and we're just feeling it in the UK as a result of them essentially spreading the cost, like trying to even it out.
It might be, yeah.
But it's entirely speculation on my part, and I have no insider knowledge to that particular.
Yeah, I'm sure someone will suss it out eventually, but that's it's a bit disappointing to hear. But we're no stranger to being disappointed by Steamforged at the moment, are we?
Really bashing on them, but what can you do?
We're really going to be bumming all of our listeners out, aren't we? Like trashing these companies.
Screw Kickstarter, screw Steamforged games. It's all over.
Yeah, yeah. Sort of apocalyptic picture we're painting of the industry. But let's move on to a cheerier subject. Let's talk about Elaine.
I am
what Elaine's been up to.
the best subject to talk about.
There we go. And so modest as well.
I am. I'm so modest.
Yeah. So, as we mentioned earlier, you're currently producer at DigiSprite, which is your own startup.
Yep, it's myself, Robin, who's the director, and Sam, who's the lead designer.
Yep.
We started up a couple of years ago now, primarily focusing on board games.
We do like board games.
We do like
Yep.
board
It
games.
has been said.
Our first game, we took that onto Kickstarter. That was Doomsday Bots, and that was all successful and good. You can buy that now from our store.
Oh, it's out, is it?
It is, yeah. You can
Oh.
buy it from our store. You can still probably follow links through Kickstarter if you're so inclined. We're on to our second game now, which is Adventure Mart, and that's just been picked up for publishing by Hub Games. So that should be coming out sometime next year, around about sort of June. We're aiming to have a launch for the UK Games Expo next year for Adventure Mart.
Very nice.
And we'll be moving on to our next game because the DigiSprite train never stops. There's always board games to make. There's always ideas a brewing.
Great. So, and the Adventure Mart was a bit of an unusual one because it was on Kickstarter, but it is no longer.
Yeah, it's an interesting story with that one. So after Doomsday Bots, we were quite happy with the crowdfunding model. It's really nice to be able to go directly to your players and things. So we put Adventure Mart up, did all the Kickstarter and everything, and then we went off to the UK Games Expo. And when we were there demoing the game, because we like to have a stall, this year we were selling Doomsday Bots, so that was it. But we also like to, it's like a great opportunity to just play test your game. Expos and things like that, you'll get like 60 odd games with people from all around the world coming to expos, so it's really great. And then we ended up just talking to different people, and we got talking to Rory at Hub Games, and he was just very, very excited by the game and the prospect and stuff, and they literally were just like, would you be interested in us publishing this? And we were like, oh, hey, that would be cool. So we ended up actually cancelling the Kickstarter because we were about 2 weeks in, and we were all looking good. We were on track to fund, etc. But it didn't feel right to continue to ask people for money when we would have a publisher and things like that. And also like having multiple versions of the game out in the wild, like a Kickstarter version, but then a version that goes to publisher and everything. It'd be a bit weird. So yeah, we ended up cancelling the Kickstarter, but everyone was very chill with it. I think most people are just happy to see the game getting the wider release that it deserves.
I think as well, it probably reassured not that an independent publisher is going to produce an inferior game, but certainly when you're going through a publisher, there's that extra layer of quality assurance, isn't there?
Yeah, we've learned a lot just from like working with Hub Games already. There's always a degree of back and forth because you're trying as hard as you can to hold on to the artistic vision of your game. When there are, the original version that we put out on Kickstarter had playmats. For context, the game's essentially about the high concept is running a convenience store in a fantasy world. So it's all very, very kind of fun, sort of anime-inspired slice of life thing. And part of the original pitch was that each player would have like a big player board that was their shop and things like that, and you'd put your cards down in various slots and everything. But it was one of the first things when we spoke to Hub Games, and they're like, well, you don't need these. They're just kind of they're like an extra thing. Like, you know, they're a nice little bit of art, but they don't add anything to the game. But they add a lot to the price, and the bulk of the box and everything. So we could get rid of these, reduce the size of the box, reduce costs, make it a little bit more friendly and things like that, and a little bit lower price point so more people can buy it. And it's the type of thing we're like, yeah, that's very true. And part of that, you know, comes from Kickstarter is very, you know, the projects that tend to do well. There's this illusion that it's the big games that come with all the extra stuff, big box titles, more things, stretch goals. So it's very refreshing to hear a voice saying, actually, no, you know, it's okay for it to be a smaller box game and things like that.
Yeah.
So all little shifts like that happen as the game's like changing over the last couple of months, but there's not been anything major. But you learn a lot.
And it's all to the good. It looks really nice, actually. The adventure art, like you were saying, it's that sort of anime chibi style artwork that you've gone for. So it meshes quite nicely with the theme, actually.
Yeah, thank you. It's for anyone who loves anime or Animal Crossing.
Yeah.
Adventure Mart's got that art style. It's fun because the art style is one of the things we always hear, is that it's very approachable, but the gameplay can actually be very savage.
Oh, wow.
It's got that good card game granularity to it, where you know, you can it's capitalism, right? You're running convenience stores and trying to sell the most things to the most customers to beat the other convenience store. So it's I find it great fun to have that. The art style is very, very cute and approachable, but sometimes when people sit down to play, they're like, "Oh, I like this. I can do things. It's not all everyone holding hands and singing Kumbaya as rainbows go overhead. I can."
It's savage.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah. And we've now had both ends of the political spectrum represented on the podcast. Nice sense of completion there. But currently, as you were saying before we started recording, you are very busy working for Cubicle 7, aren't you?
I am. Yes, I was originally brought on freelance writing to write for the upcoming Age of Sigmar tabletop role-playing game. So that's been good fun. That's been great fun. And I'm now also, since Cubicle 7 got the rights to Wrath or Glory, the 40k tabletop RPG. I've been writing a lot for that as well. So lots of writing into the wee hours of the morning.
And you were saying that Cubicle 7 have a bit of a recruitment drive that you were told to mention.
They do. Yes, so Cubicle 7 are quite good at hiring people, freelancers in to write for adventure modules, and sometimes bringing onto like core books and all that sort of thing, depending on how you're doing. And they're currently looking for freelance adventure writers for Wrath or Glory, is I believe the current thing. They're great people to work with. Like, I had a good time. They gave me my first sort of break. I'm by far and away not a super seasoned adventure writer. I don't have screeds and screeds of books to my name, but Cubicle 7, like, you know, took me on, took a chance, and it's working out so well so far. So certainly give it a shot.
Yeah, it's always quite nice to hear, isn't it, of companies, and Cubicle 7's quite a well-established one, actually, that are taking a chance on new talent, because a lot of the time when you're trying to get started, and this is a problem in any industry, you get confronted with that, the old adage of, we need someone with more experience, and it's like, well, how do I get experience if no one's going to give me a chance to accrue said experience?
That's the great big problem, especially with things like freelance work and writing and everything. It can be very, very difficult to get your foot in the door. But yeah, For me, it was a very sort of simple thing with Cubicle 7. They've got a good system where they'll take a couple of, I believe it's 2 pages writing sample you've got. So give them 2 pages of your work and, fill in the CV and all that sort of stuff. And the team will sit down and read through it and chat a little bit and see how things go. So that...
There you are, folks.
So how did you kind of get into freelance? What kind of drew you to go in that way with it and going with RPG writing in particular?
Well, in terms of like what got me into the RPG writing and everything, that's mostly just like being a lifelong tabletop RPG nerd. So I've always been sort of like forever GM, so writing campaigns, writing adventure modules, all these sorts of things were something that I've done in my spare time for a long time. And always running games and people saying like, oh wow, this is like... there was a period of time where I think it was like Roll20. They have this thing of like professional paid GMs and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And people were always like, oh, you should totally be like a paid GM and all this kind of stuff. I was like, no, that's ludicrous. But writing adventures that other people can run was very cool. And I'd sat down and done things like worked with Savage Worlds was one that I really fell in love with. Which for those who are not aware, it's like a tabletop RPG sort of open system.
Uh-huh.
Similar to like GURPS or something like that. It's kind of, here's a basic framework, homebrew to your heart's content. So I ended up smashing a bunch of modules together and making a post-apocalyptic superheroes game and running that, and I wrote rulebooks and homebrew stuff and everything. And I did that, I must have written that about 4 years ago now. But an excerpt from that was one of the things I actually supplied to Cubicle 7 as like a writing sample to show, hey, I can write fluff, but I can also write, here's some rules for this homebrew system and things like that.
So that's part of what I was kind of interested in. So do you do sort of more fluff, or do you do rules, or is it kind of a combination of the two? And how much control do you have over that when you're freelancing it?
For me, again, I can only speak from working from Cubicle 7, so
Sure.
it may not be for everyone. For me, I write a bit of both because I've been working in games and things like that for a long time. I'm very well sort of experienced with all these sort of trying to find that mesh between fluff and rules.
Mm-hmm.
With Cubicle 7, they very much they put out the call for Age of Sigmar, and it was for adventure writers. And I got in touch, and that was cool. They're like, okay, yeah, we'd like to bring you on. And I'm writing the starter set has an adventure in it.
Okay.
So I'm writing part of the starter set. And also a adventure module that's essentially coming along with a separate adventure module. But when I was writing away with these things as well, they were also like, okay, so we're looking for someone to write some bestiary entries. And I was like, I'll put my hat in the ring for that one. I'll write some bestiary entries. And then before I know it, I'm writing all the chaos gods and followers of chaos and all that sort of stuff in there as well. And just sort of moving on from there. So with Wrath or Glory, they're like, okay, we really liked what you did with the bestiary entries on Age of Sigmar, so how about taking the War Gear section with Wrath or Glory? And yeah, sure, I'm writing a bunch of that stuff, and then moving on to writing archetypes for Wrath or Glory as well. And then now coming back full circle where they're like, okay, we're looking for more pitches for adventure modules for Wrath or Glory and more adventure modules for Age of Sigmar and everything. Okay, cool, so let's go back to this. So it's kind of like a fluid thing. There's not necessarily a, hello, you are the person who writes about the guns. You sit over there and write about the guns. You are the person who sits and writes about the adventures. It's quite a sort of fluid thing.
Yeah.
It's all done.
So the Warhammer worlds have got fairly substantial followings, and I think it's fair to say that as far as like fandoms go, expectations have never been higher for them, and we've actually seen some quite negative examples of how that can go. I'm thinking particularly with like the Star Wars franchise.
Mm.
Do you feel quite a heavy burden of expectation on you because you're approaching an existing IP as opposed to something that's your own?
I would say it's probably about half and half. So I have the benefit of being a long-term Games Workshop fan. The thing that actually got me into wanting to make games in the first place was playing Mordheim back when I was a teenager. And I actually wrote an article that's on the Cubicle 7 page right now just about like how I got into making games and everything, and it was Games Workshop titles. So on the one hand, I feel that pressure to do good and to do things like factions justice, because I'm also a fan. I've seen interpretations of Warhammer 40k that I've not been like super on board with. I'm like, you see an animation or a description, and you're like, that's not how a bolt gun works. Come on, it's supposed to be a self-propelled micro-missile that penetrates and then explodes. It's not a machine gun, you know.
I know what you're talking about.
So you know, it's like having one foot on either side of wanting to do very well and do justice to these things while also being utterly terrified of being one of those people who the fan base turn around and go, you are so incredibly wrong.
I suppose it's a tricky line to walk, really, being both a consumer and a creator in that sense. You know, you're buying into your own product in a sense, but I suppose it gives you an extra sense of investment as well to do right by it.
And you sort of, I'm lucky as well because you don't write in a vacuum with these things either. There is like a collection of writers on Age of Sigmar, Wrath of Glory, and we all sit there and discard, and we sort of fact check each other's work and sort of bounce ideas off each other and everything. So there's definitely, you know, that sort of thing where you're getting support through it. There's not many occasions where I really worry. I think the entry I had the most anxiety over recently was writing all of the Sisters of Sigmar. Sisters of Battle. There we go. You can tell it's late on a Friday night. But like Sisters of Battle were one of those factions in 40k that have kind of been dear to my heart, and I know they're very dear to the wider community because for the longest period of time they've not really had much in the way of official support on the tabletop. So I've always felt like the tabletop RPGs are the places where people can play with these characters and explore them more. And luckily enough, the sisters are finally getting plastic sisters after all these years. Finally getting them. But I'm sitting there and I'm writing about like, you know, the different archetypes within the Sisters of Battle and things like that. And I'm like, oh man, these are going to be looked over and their text is going to be copy pasted and it's going to go onto like Wikipedias and used all over the place. And if I make any slip up, people are going to be having lore arguments about me, and they're going to be like, no, it was said in this book that they do this or that or whatever.
I think you should just really, really go mad and just put something completely gonzo in just to see if it floats out.
It's like you're basically avoiding at all costs the fate that Matt Ward has. I think it's that they've absolutely crucified him on the 1D4chan website. Poor guy.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the thing, is that you can put down your absolute best work, but when you never know what's going to happen with your content once it goes out into the wild, and there's always I've always got this sort of running argument in the back of my head of like authorial intent, like what I write and what I think I'm writing about could be very different from what it's interpreted as, and then before you know it, there's people having flame wars over over things or burning effigies in your name. But I highly doubt anything like that would happen. There is a good approval process. As I say, there's the writing circle, and then it goes off, and GW has the final say on things before it goes out the door. It's unlikely you'll find me strung up in a Games Workshop forum anytime soon, I like to think.
Yeah, I hope so. And it's just when we're talking about Matt Ward and these poor people that write for existing IPs. The thing that I'll, as soon as anyone mentions him, that I always think about is that cartoon that was bounced around the internet for a while of a Blood Angel and a Necron having a fist bump.
I remember that.
Yeah, he was not a popular man for that particular addition to the 40k chronology.
So you mentioned there, Elaine, that when you do the adventure side of things, you pitch the idea for the adventure. So does that mean you sort of get to decide the overall plot of the adventure and then take it further, or do they sort of direct you on that?
So the way it's worked with Cubicle 7 so far, I've had two sort of experiences. The first one was writing for the Age of Sigmar, and they're like, okay, cool, so we have this setting. We have these like overarching sort of like the plot of the main adventure and things like that. So here, go for like some like side quests, side adventures, or an adventure that like ramps into the main book and things like that. So that was a little bit more constrained in terms of obviously things need to happen, or at least certain touchstones need to happen, and there's like a shared pool of say characters or whatever. So if somebody's writing about the leader of like a freehold or something like that, obviously when you're writing your module, you need to make sure you don't contradict any of that. So it's like a collaborative effort. I don't sit by the forge and build this meticulously perfect story and then leap forth, slam it down on the table and say, "'Tis ready." And then they go, "No, it's wrong." It's a very iterative back and forth process.
Yeah.
With the Wrath or Glory stuff, there's a little bit more freedom with that, and just with being sort of like 40k in general, you can there's an entire solar systems to run around in. And that was very much more just hey, we're looking for. They just tapped a bunch of their writers that we've got on staff and saying like, hey, so any ideas? And then it's like, oh, cool, right? So I've got this idea for an adventure. I can't say anything about it because it's all under NDA, but it's great.
That's cool.
And I tend to essentially put down because for me, again, thinking about it from a consumer, I guess, whenever I see a splat book for a game, there's two things I'm looking for: a cool adventure and cool content I can rip out of that adventure and use elsewhere. With Wrath or Glory or whatever, I might be like, alright, okay, cool, so here's this very cool adventure that's based on say a Mechanicus world, and it's going to be this cool thing, but then we're also going to include a bunch of additional Mechanicus archetypes, things like that. Disclaimer, not necessarily something.
Good to get that out there.
These are just I'm just throwing this down on the table, but it's that idea of like, okay, so we can do this. Here's an outline of the story, and here's the cool extra things we could bundle in for people. Make it worth their while outside of just running the story. I don't know about anyone else, but I own so many splat books that I'll never run.
I don't talk about those kinds of things. It's doesn't bear thinking about, let alone talking about.
But I'll buy a £20 book if it's got an extra couple of classes or archetypes in it that I can pull out and use in an adventure of my own crafting, things like that. So,
do you run your adventures for people yourselves, or do you let other people run them? What's your preference on that?
In terms of the adventures we're writing?
Yeah, or when you have written adventures, or is it all NDA restricted?
No, we do. We'll have like sort of playtest groups and things like that, especially if we're making any iterations on rules for anything we're working on, and we always want to be playing through them and things like that. I don't currently have like a local group I can do that with, so I mostly like kick my stuff off and they'll have a look through it and they might play it. I know Cubicle 7 have like multiple regular games going on, and they're pretty good. You can, they've offered before, like, oh hey, if you wanna, you can just like, call in the conference call and we'll like stream it, like so that you can like, see how things are going.
I like the idea of a conference call to play a game.
that's the
In the boardroom.
that's the industry, you know.
Yeah, it's fair.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely we try to get some good playtime out of anything we're writing, because you got to run your own stuff and see if it flies.
For sure. So when can we expect to see the Age of Sigmar roleplay and Wrath and Glory out in the wild?
I don't think I can talk any release dates. If you check the Cubicle 7 websites and Twitter and other social media things, I think they'll have release dates up there. But I don't want to say anything because I can't quite pin the dates to mind.
Drop yourself in it.
Terrible with dates when it comes to launch things.
As soon as you try to utter a date, the Cubicle 7 SWATs will come in and take it away.
Nobody expects Cubicle 7.
They might.
Yeah.
Who knows? No, if I remembered them, like I'm pretty sure there's launch dates for both of them. I literally just don't remember them.
Yeah, and don't want to incriminate yourself, which is understandable.
Understandable.
And as far as people that are interested in DigiSprite and what DigiSprite are up to, where should they go to find out more about that?
Well, you can find us on our website, which is just digisprite.co.uk, I believe. You can also catch us. We're quite active on Twitter. I believe it's Team DigiSprite. On Twitter as well. That's probably where we do our most stuff. We're always like posting up new art from the games or pictures of us looking tired and goofy behind stalls, and selling copies of our various games.
Great. Elaine, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much for having me.
Not at all. And for all of our listeners, wherever you are, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.